Hello, it's April 19th, 2017. I'm Tony Smario, coming to you from my father, BroSal.org YouTube channel with a quick World War III this week, as I've been reflecting on some few things that I've gathered in my own research this week. And it's just struck me to point out, first of all, I find it a little bit odd that as much as everyone talks about World War III, World War III, World War III, it seems to be quite popular on everyone's lips. It's, excuse me, for some time, through the media, through the movies, we're all being programmed, conditioned to be aware that we're going in, the time is coming for World War III. It's probably all very important to the way they understand the psychology of us and what we need to be completely committed when the time comes. But what I find missing from the discussion is the Albert Pike prediction, the supposed prediction. I'm happy to say that, let's talk about it. Let's find out why it's such an obvious hoax. Because it just seems interesting that whether he predicted it or whether William Guy Carr was the first person in the 50s to talk about it, or I'm sorry, in the 20s, I think he first wrote about it. Whatever it is, it's long before this supposed Third World War between Zionism and Islam. Certainly it was before Zionism had any political strength in the world, when it was just still an idea. And if it was instigated by Pike, it's at the very creation of Zionism, right around the end of the 19th century, that Pike supposedly makes this prediction, or not a prediction, I'm sorry, a strategy that's become for us like watching a prediction. But at the time, we have to imagine that this is the guy that these this is the 33rd degree Mason Grand Master of the Scottish Rite. He's, got this very, I don't know what you can believe anymore from research. They seem to show him as little more than a killer for America, as far as a Confederate general, or for Britain, whoever he was really working for at that time. He's credited with being one of the co-founders of the KKK, so that's not exactly a humanitarian operation. So, for all intents and purposes, whatever the history of the guy is, he's not known as any sort of real hero. He is known as a genius of sorts. I think he spoke many languages, 6 or 8 or something ridiculous. And was, of course, a hero of the occult knowledge and Grand Master of the Masons. And coincidentally enough, in this very secular world of symbols and hierarchical power, Pike's got a statue of him in Washington, District of Columbia, this fortified military zone, this military arm of this international cabal that includes the City of London, where the banking is centered, and the Vatican City, where the false Christianity is centered. But in the District of Columbia, the only Confederate general that's got a big old life-size statue is Albert Pike, coincidentally known to us researchers of conspiracy, geopolitics, history, eschatology, as the one who it's attributed to this supposed strategy of 3 world wars. And so whether he's responsible or not, just the whole notion of it and the idea of Zionism, which was started at that time, that this is something possibly being set up, what would be going on now, like 120 years or so, since Pike laid out what they need to do. And as I think I said last week or recently, I view the Third World War as not something separate from the other two, but that this is all a plan to take over Palestine and rule the world forever. And that plan was the modern version that includes the three world wars, which to me gives some credence to the argument that perhaps it truly is a strategy that was written down right about the time of the beginning of Zionism, is that the Third World War was to pit this Zionism against Islam to the destruction of both. And that I've been saying for some time, all the people that are so happy to follow this obviously propagandized, left-wing controlled opposition lead of blame the Rothschilds. They're the top of the pyramid. They're, Zionism. If it's not the Rothschilds banking, it's Zionism, and it's usually that combination is seen as a unit, which it most certainly is, but I say the plan's much deeper than Zionism, and Zionism's being used as a tool because none of those people actually believe in God, in the sense of the Mosaic God, that they need to build a temple and worship God, wait for a Messiah to come. That's the whole point. Why are they characterized as the synagogue of Satan? If that's the case, why is it so obvious that they have none of the characteristics observed through Moses and the Deuteronomy promise to circumcise their heart and bring them back to the land, and to be a blessing to the whole world, and not a deceitful word would ever be found in their mouth again? Well, come on. Not even the supporters of Israel can completely get behind any of that. So, I'm always trying to point out, blaming Zionism makes a great scapegoat in the end, when all along, if this has been a strategy, is to use this world political Zionism as the thing that draws in Islam that sets off this great Third World War. So I want to just look for a minute on this red team, blue team paradigm, which I think is the most important aspect of understanding how we get to the World War III, how it's really happening all around us while we're being distracted through all this sensationalized propaganda, most of which is probably as real as a Hollywood production can make it, or even a B-movie production, so much of it. But all this North Korea and Iran nuclear weapon, Hezbollah, the threat of nuclear weapons, Russian aggression, these all can be seen to be, obviously not believed by the people who are selling them. If it's easy enough for a guy like me to uncover such things as Professor Sutton's work, or Eustace Mullins, all these kind of, of course they know that we know that they're up to something. So they know what their own versions are meant to convey. And it seems pretty obvious that they make this Zionism such a natural culprit to us, not us, but I say this left-wing voice that they give to the resistance of the right-wing insanity of, empire building. They give them this left-wing voice of, Zionism. They run the government. They run America. The Zionists, the Zionists, the Zionists. So won't be hard for the people who are, let's say, that hired Albert Pike to give them a strategy. See, I say those people are primarily Europeans. They're behind the Vatican. They're behind the Bank of England. They're behind the Bolshevik Revolution. They're behind Zionism. They're behind Albert Pike and the Masonic movement. They're behind the Skull and Bones. They're behind the Illuminati. You know, who are these people? This isn't just Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, these kind of people. They're like Eustace Mullins used to teach, or his vision of it anyway, was that there's bound to be 3 tiers of people who run the world. And the Rockefellers are really on that second tier that are put into power by people like the Rothschilds and these old families that have been running the world since the Crusades, let's say. The Hesse-Kassels, the Habsburgs, the Warburgs, all these kind of, I'm not sure if I confuse the Warburgs there. They might be down there on Rockefeller's level. But anyway, you've got this circle at the top that's, of course, you don't hear much about these people. And they are the ones that feed money to the second circle, of which these probably Rothschilds and bankers are a part, of which then the third circle, and perhaps even Eustace Mullins was one circle off, and had the Rothschilds up in this top circle to alienate even further whoever's really, you know, as I said last week, who entrusted old Bauer with the money to start loaning money to countries, and who had the military at that time to back Bauer up? Because Bauer and his kids didn't have it yet. So I say that that's never talked about, but it's obviously relevant. But anyway, the visible layers certainly reach down to this, finally this circle like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Bush family, and all these people that are at that most visible tier but are connected to the tier above them. They work faithfully for the tier above them, who are, say, the Rockefellers and such, the J.P. Morgans, the Warburgs, that have been given the power from the tier above them, who perhaps, let's say, are the Rothschilds and these Jesuit bankers and such. And then they probably sit in on circles of which no one knows who those people are. I'm just trying to make the point that when World War III is all said and done and all these Zionists everyone's happy to blame have been destroyed, then these people can come in as heroes and help with their new monetary system. Can all be done under a different guise altogether. The wonderful light of Lucifer. I mean, if we're going to believe, you know, the Pike, if we're going to follow with this Albert Pike being really part of the strategy that is responsible for the last 100 years of our history and is relevant to the coming World War III. You know, Pike's the one that mentions all this idea about that this final conflict's going to leave people so unsure. The people who both believe in religion and the people who don't believe in religion are both going to see that their faith has been misplaced, according to these Pike writings. And out of that will come the ability to reveal Lucifer in the open. So this revealing of Lucifer, you know, of course, Lucifer is God, the good God, Lucifer, who brought light to humanity. So, you know, one can only imagine what their idea of that brilliant golden age of Luciferian rule will look like. It would seem from a lot of their plans and schemes, meaning Georgia Guidestones and the, you know, whatever they call this thing, the Project 2030 or whatever, Project for a New American Century, all these eugenic programs, they all aim at a world in which they don't have war and famine and disease and, right? They're looking for a world that's all scientifically controlled and everyone has what they need. And so, you know, they have these twisted ideas in their head. the evil isn't that they necessarily want, everybody wants to hurt someone. The evil is in being selfish and looking after the self and not loving our neighbor, not having that true spirit of God, which is a spirit of giving and a spirit of loving, and, that meekness, humbleness, mercy, justice, all these things that we get represented over and over in the scriptures as sort of the constitution of God, the character, this is what the Spirit of God represents. So evil, obviously, is all the opposite of that, which is the selfishness and greediness and always looking out for number one, and believing that that's justified. Because, of course, we live in just a material existence where the best we can do is take care of ourselves, right? The modern secret, love ourselves first so we can love others, which, of course, is the real truth turned on its head. Love others the same way we love ourselves. So whether we love ourselves, whatever that definition is, that should be equal already to others. We don't have to find this love for ourselves, which is, of course, just an ego worship. Find our own joy, our own happiness, our own center, our own balance, our own lack of negativity. Well, that's just the opposite of what a Buddhist or a Christian encounters in the world of suffering, having to take on the reality of negativity and suffering as something that's personal. I'm responsible for it, whether as a Buddhist because of my illusion, of ego importance, me, my separation of me from everything else that I persist in, or that Christian perspective that suffering is that I have an opportunity. It's not my responsibility necessarily, but it's my opportunity as a vessel to, allow the Spirit of God to use me in service toward the relief of suffering, the exposition of love in the universe. This is the real God. And so it's been twisted in all these very subtle ways where they still, that's what Christians don't understand. They think the Antichrist is anti-Christian. But, well, not according to Scripture. The Antichrist technically is the false deliverer, since the Jews are waiting for a Messiah other than Jesus. Jesus wasn't the Messiah. They're going to build another temple and wait for the Messiah to come. So the Antichrist is technically the false deliverer. The spirit of Antichrist is, everything that, prepares the world to accept that false deliverer as the true deliverer of the world. That's why it will come looking very much like what Christians talk about Christ, the true deliverer, representing love and tolerance and mercy. And, obviously that's what the false deliverer is going to be able to claim, or at least the followers you would think. They're going to be talking about people that simply are anti-Christian. That doesn't make any sense. Or at least that doesn't make any sense to the Scripture. The false prophet of Revelation comes with horns like a lamb. I don't know what that reference is, but why a lamb makes any sense unless it's the Lamb of God slain from the foundation of the world. Also in Revelation, in the beginning, there's seen a lamb as if it had been slain. So the only real reference that makes any sense in seeing this false prophet as having two horns like a lamb is that it comes in the appearance of this, Messiah figure, or in that representation. So we would expect it to be a subtle variation, not a black and white opposition. And I think that's why it's always been set up in false Christianity to be this black, we're waiting for the devil with pitchfork to come and threaten to kill all Christians. No, the false Messiah is going to come and show how Christianity's just lost their way and they don't understand. that of course Jesus was real, of course Jesus was the savior of Christianity, or whatever they can say, but that the Messiah for the Jews is someone else. And most of false Christianity, I'm pretty sure, be happy to go along with a story in which they get to keep their Jesus saves, but go along with a story that doesn't fit the Scripture. So I don't know how all that's going to go down. And I digress from the World War III concept of the red team, blue team. I want to keep pointing at that to undermine the modern hysteria, the current hysteria of, the war with Russia, Russian aggression, all the military buildup, North Korea. Most of this you can see is fake because it has something else I was watching this week showed some World War II footage. And boy, oh boy, you could really see the war going on. You could really see all these operations were not drills. These were not training operations. This was not somebody taking footage of just tanks rolling around a training ground. You could see the death and destruction happening. And you could even see the locations, these certain cities in Europe and stuff, in which the death and destruction was happening. They could, just like they could go to the moon in the 60s, but they can't go back or show you a fresh picture from space. And it's funny, just recently, I've also seen where they're talking recently about trying to create this new project through NASA to get through the Van Allen belt so that one day they can send astronauts through the Van Allen belts. And they keep confirming that you can't go beyond the first layer there, near Earth atmosphere or space, whatever they call that, right? Now, nowhere near the moon. So they already confirmed today that we still don't quite have the technology worked out yet, though we're getting close to get through that radiation belt beyond it unharmed with a vessel that can hold a person, because we've never been able to do that. Oops, but wait a minute. 50 years ago, we went to the moon and back. So anyway, that's how transparent it all is. And they know that. That's how much psychological control they have, that it doesn't matter. That's why they don't have to spend a lot of money and time, keeping everybody convinced of an argument that can hold water. It's like a movie script. I remember when Dad first watched Ocean's 11, and it's such a fun movie, and at the end it seems so satisfying. But then Dad said, how'd they get all those pamphlets in that van? Who put all that in there, So, there's all these holes. If they were really carrying the money out, so you see the holes only after you've watched the movie 5 times and you have time for the other side of your mind to reflect on the part that's not paying attention while you're caught up in the alpha version of it, or whatever they call that, left brain, right brain type of attention that we pay. So, when they've got you watching your TV, and they got the whole world now on this stuff, and coincidentally, it all starts when they first figure out how to work our brains back in the 20s and 30s and 40s after the Nazi scientists had gotten, their breakthroughs and then were brought to America to continue. It's all one people. Let's, come on. We funded the rise of Germany. They set that up after World War I. This is part of what I want to get to with this red team, blue team paradigm that you need to see, why you shouldn't worry about Russian aggression and all this talk about North Korea. They put all these weapons in everybody's hands. The same group of people did this on what you have to believe is a very strategically coordinated history over the last 100 years. Because what did World War I, what was that for except to set up the red team, blue team paradigm? Because before then, when this strategy comes about, 1890s, darn, you still had British Empire having to sail around the world. You know, how did you convey your wishes to the people in India? You still had to have outposts over there, people that were carrying out what you told them the last ship that came through. And so you had to have military stationed all over the world and then start indoctrinating the local people and training them in your ways and, right, turning the whole world into the British Empire. So it wasn't so easy back then just because the strategy was, okay, we have the money and the tech, we have the power to take over the world. How do we do it? Albert Pike, since you're communing with devils, I mean, I don't know. Let's just throw it all out there. Albert, chief of the Masonic order, a prince of, human demons or whatever you are. For whatever reason, we're coming to you for this strategy. How do we do it? How do we get all these various places around? How do I control the people of India? What are they going to do? Okay, well, divide and conquer was a much older, Albert Pike as a strategist and this genius that he was, general. I imagine he would have read some books, no? On strategy. So divide and conquer would have been pretty apparent to him, I imagine. So I say World War I was, you got to get this red team, blue team paradigm going so you can get to this Third World War where you got Zionism and Islam destroy each other because that's what gets rid of all these religious people that would be left. And then now you got all these, religious and non-religious that you've created, the false religions, the Catholics basically, and the atheists, the materialists that you've created. Two things that all along while you're creating them are false. Materialism's false. Especially if you're a Luciferian Masonic high priest, right? Who claims in his writings Lucifer is God. Okay, so materialism's false. And according to this Pike writings, the part of this World War III, this final conflict, is to bring into conflict these two peoples, one that worships, this false religion, and another one that denies God and denies religion. And they're both going to fight it out to the death, and the survivors in the world won't know what to think. Everybody was wrong. So in other words, that's the way Pike's story lays it out. I'm going to say that the red team, blue team paradigm is in recognition of the divide and conquer understanding, the Hegelian dialectic, all of which would have been, fresh before a man like Pike. And that you can see the red team was set up to be communism and the atheism to plant the seed that would then go to China and such, and North Korea and all these, Indo-Chinese places that would be divided now through their conquering into the pro-NATO false Christianity, Catholicism following, South Korea, South Vietnam and such, and the North Russian communist following atheists, supposedly. None of any of that's really true, but that's how you divide, politically, geopolitically now. That's where the weapons go, to communist atheists, and then on the other side, the blue team becomes your capitalist Catholics, basically, in World War I. And you can see how they use Prussia now, which becomes Germany, but the defeated Prussia, which had been the strength of Europe, because of their indoctrination of the children into a scheme of producing for the state and, being willing to support the production and military to keep the state strong rather than look after your own well-being as, say, a free-thinking individual who just wanted to farm or play music or write poetry or explore or, right? No, you can't. You're going to get conquered by somebody else if you live a life of recreation. But if you commit to a system of production, of physical production and military security, what you found in the Prussian experiment is you become almost invincible. Not quite. So, but they used that whole to get rid of the Ottoman Empire, right? Because you can see what came out of World War I. They destroyed the Ottoman Empire and set up the Middle East for this future Third World War, I think. That was what the whole Sykes-Picot redrawing, they had to divide these Muslim people the way they divided the Indo-Chinese people into communists and capitalists. They had to divide these Muslim people. And so they had to destroy the Ottoman Empire and divide the Hashemite kingdom. So they used the Prussians to join with the Ottomans to get that war against now Russia, England, eventually America, and the Hashemites coming, bringing the Muslims up from the south. And so you destroy the Ottoman Empire, you redraw the lines in the Middle East to set you up for the future, because remember, it's a red team, blue team thing that you're having to set up if you're Albert Pike strategizing this. So I'm going to use Prussia after this war to set up for the next war. By the treaty that we make for blaming Prussia for the war, we're going to drive their economy broke and drive them to a place where we can then send them a savior that we'll call Hitler in the end, and give them the solution that can bring those people around this savior and get them ready to go to World War II. So that's what comes out of World War I. We'll use Prussia for World War II, which they did, destroy the Ottoman Empire, which they did, set up the Middle East for the future, which they did by, using the Hashemites and then setting up the Saud, the kingdom of Saud, and denying the Hashemites their caliphate by putting them under French and British jurisdiction. And then what you see coming after that now is the red team replacing Christianity, genocidally for the most part, replacing Christianity. This red team you set up. Not just Christianity, again, the Chinese people, just sort of creating the red team out of this big block of the earth that primarily starts with the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia and all of that old area from Turkey all the way up in Russia, which is, was Orthodox Christianity. So what comes out of World War I is the immediate replacing of Orthodox Christianity with this red team of communism, atheism, so-called, in the territory that used to be Orthodox Christianity under the strong arm and financing of the blue team, which are setting their scheme up in America under this idea of free market capitalism, all supported out of Europe by the Catholics, the Jesuits, the money and the flow, not just the Catholics, of course, these Rothschilds who, as they say, are they spending Catholic money? Where'd they get their money? Who's supporting them? But anyway, they become the founders of this Zionism, which seems to be used by Pike. So to say Rothschilds is this great Jew leader that wants to rebuild Zionism for God or anything else, well, I don't know if he's part of this cabal to take over the world who hires Albert Pike to give him a strategy. He's there at that time, funding and setting up Zionism, using the blue team of the free market capitalist Christians, so-called, these Catholics, as the military and financing to get all this done. And so, so-called Jew Rothschild, it would seem a lot clearer to see that he's part of the, Zionism is just part of the setup like capitalism, like communism, right? All of this is part of a plan to rule the world. And if it's, a lot of people, it's very hard for me to keep ignoring the spiritual element. I mean, it's very hard to read the scripture and, Sheol and all of the spiritual elements. Just as someone who studies metaphysics and has my own metaphysical ideas, it's also very hard for me because I know when my mind starts imagining that, I'm seeing in this anthropomorphized vision of, Dante and layers of hell and heaven and angels flying around space like Zeus and Apollo. And, it's just, I don't know. I can see why the Greeks represented it that way, because how else can our mind represent these spiritual realities? But what's a spiritual reality? I doubt very much it's like the vision of angels flying around in outer space. So this is the difficulty I have personally in just throwing these symbols around as if they're literal. And yet, there's no doubt in my mind that when I start piecing all the pieces of the puzzle together, if I'm going to figure Pike into it, and I just don't see how he can't, how he can be completely ignored as insignificant in all this, or as irrelevant, as coincidental. It's just coincidence it's his statue. Just coincidence he was this grand master of the Masonic order, of which just so happens all the leaders of the world, all have to come through. They're all tied to Catholic orders. They're all tied to these secret societies that go back for hundreds of years and encompass the entire world. But that's just all insignificant. It's just irrelevant, right? It's just all still a bunch of BS that they attribute these 3 World War quotes to Pike, which is why in all the hype about 3 World War, nobody keeps elaborating on the big joke it is that Albert Pike predicted it. You just don't hear his name brought up very much in that constant barrage of World War III talk. You do a little bit, but it's very rarely sort of brought out in any sort of journalistic sense in which you try and make some of these connections, right? These secret societies and who's the funding, and if he were to have made this strategy, who would it have been for? And how is it that we find ourselves 120 years later facing a world where Islam and Zionism are very close to what can be seen as a war more significant than the Crusades, in the sense that during the Crusades, they were fighting over the territory. If the Third World War happens the way I'm imagining it has to, which is that they have to say peace and safety first. They have to make this peace with Palestine so they can rebuild their temple, so that they're either the Messiah or the false prophet. I'm not sure that it matters, but something spiritual can happen in that temple, described to us as these supposed miracles, fire coming down from heaven, the image made to speak, so that the world worships it. Now, when you got that, well, then you've got a reason to now claim that it's time to take that land over and rule. That land of Israel for God, right? That brings about this war that Pike may have predicted with Islam, because that Islam becomes the Shia crescent they keep talking about, that extends from Yemen all the way through Persia, all the way around to Syria, through Iraq. That Shia crescent now has to come against Israel finally at that point. And I think that's why they've been set up to do so. If this is all being set up, which is what I'm trying to point out. So let's go back to now the fact that World War I results in Prussia getting used to set up World War II, the destruction of the Ottoman Empire at the expense of basically Russia and the Hashemites, because while Russia was off destroying the Ottoman Empire, they were getting screwed, and a coup was going on to take over their country. And the Hashemites likewise were getting screwed, and a coup was going on to take over their caliphate. And the red team now, for the next foreseeable future, starts replacing Christianity and then later China, Korea, much of the Eastern mind as much as possible to create the parody for the future this future great war that's going to leave the world so devastated that the leaders of the world who worship Lucifer can bring about their world rulership, which isn't Zionism. Guys, that's what I keep, that's why everybody's screaming Zionist, 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 Zionist. Well, yeah, okay. But then the Third World War, it's kind of funny that Pike says Zionism is going to be destroyed along with Islam. Islam's prophecies say Islam's going to be destroyed before the coming of the Mahdi. The Jewish prophecies say the Jews are going to be destroyed down to a remnant before the coming of the great day of the Lord. So I don't know, it's all coincidence, I guess, but I don't know why people are pointing at Zionism as if that's the great winner in it all. They look like they're the great patsy in it all to me, for the people who hired Pike, who want to worship Lucifer in God's temple, not in Solomon's temple, which they claim is Lucifer's temple, that these, that these followers of Jesus want to claim for Jesus as God. Even these followers of Islam want to claim that Jesus is the rightful ruler of that temple. He's the Messiah of those people. So the Luciferians, they want to say, no, Lucifer's the rightful ruler of that temple. So on that level, that's what's going on, and explains why these people, these Luciferians that would hire Pike to set up their temple after Zionism's destroyed, are using Zionism and the idea of a Messiah to get to the Third World War. That's where I'm coming from. So World War II now is obviously to return to Palestine in the way that World War I'm trying to look through the eyes of Pike now as the strategist. Why this red team, blue team, which is what I'm trying to point for people to help them see through the geopolitical nonsense that comes with this, all the propaganda of wars and rumors of wars that we live through today, Russian aggression, North Korea, blah, blah, blah. No, I don't think so. I say looks a little more realistic to see a strategy that's been going on for 100 years. It's got to do with dividing and conquering the world for people who want to leave the world so, depopulated and disillusioned that they can start the world over themselves. And so I say that's gone on through deception for 100 years. They're not, nuclear weapons aren't what we think they are. They're going to drop weapons and call them nuclear is what I'm seeing now. But they're incendiary, as they've always been. They don't leave this radiation that kills everybody. That's all been a story to scare everybody, because it keeps us scared to death of something, keeps them in power. Because you remember, all the think tanks told them only through fear of war, fear of calamity, fear of imminent danger. It's the only way you can keep a population following a particular, rut of leadership and not break off and do their own thing after a while. If you leave them in peace and safety, well, they'll do their own thing. So World War I was to set up the red team, blue team paradigm in the world because they didn't have the technological control they do today. It was a bigger world where you had to sail across it to get from one place to another. So they had to get the world onto a red team, blue team paradigm. And I say that's what World War I is for from a Pikean strategy perspective. And then World War II is now to return to Palestine, to turn the focus there so you can set up for this great Zionism-Islam battle that brings the red team and blue team into final conflict that lets you then clean up the mess and set up your own world control system, your throne, and bring your Luciferian reality out into the open. And so the result of the Second World War, of course, in this return to Palestine is an excuse for the Cold War comes out of that to build up the weapons for the Third World War, just like the First World War gave them the excuse to use Prussia to set them up to start the Second World War as these fascist Nazis who, you can clearly see they created that and funded that. This whole, Hitler kicked the Rothschild banks out. Isn't that interesting? Nobody else could do it. Abraham Lincoln tried it before him, got his head blown off, right? America found itself in a war in 1812 because it kicked the Rothschild-funded bank out. And John F. Kennedy, after that, found out you still couldn't get change the financial system to one that benefited anyone other than the ones that were in control of it. But Hitler, not only did he have all the support of American banks, where were they getting their money? American industrialists, who was investing in them? Oh, but Hitler kicked out the Rothschild banks and started printing their own money. Same thing that Greenback, same thing that Lincoln did, same thing that Kennedy was proposing to do, right? It's the obvious answer to debt slavery imposed by a financial dictator who uses the guns to impose the financial slavery on a nation. The obvious answer is tell them no and make your own money that you don't have to pay him interest for. But it's a mafia system, see, of security. Oh, you don't want to pay interest on the money. Oh, well, that's okay, but who's going to take care of your security? Right? So this is the system. But, Hitler got away with it. Oh, yeah, from 33 to 39, son of a gun. If those Germans who, because of the policies of the same people, these Rothschild banks who'd won the First World War and ran the world already, they're the ones that put Germany in that position. But then how did they pull them out of it? Oh, yeah, great Hitler comes along, the painter, and he kicks the Rothschild banks out of the country, prints their own money. Oh, yeah, I doubt it was any financial wizards behind Hitler that was telling him, okay, here's how you do it, man. Here's how we make the country great in inside a decade. And that's what they did. They printed their own money. They did all these public works projects like America could do if it wanted to be great. Simply start printing its own money and put its people back to work. And within a decade, you got nothing but prosperity. That's what they did in Germany. That's how it got those people riled up for the Second World War, because through Hitler's propaganda, you could see that leading up to the war, he was saying, it's Churchill, it's the English. They want the war. I don't want a war. We don't want a war. It's like the Americans say, they hate us for our way of life, right? They hate us because we're strong. We're rich. Look at us. We're making our own money. We're not being raped by their bank, and they hate us for that, and they want war. But we're never letting those banks back in because look at how rich we've gotten since we kicked them out. So of course the German people were applauding that. And of course they were following Hitler into the defense of what he'd done for them. He kicked the bank out and started printing money for the people. And investing the money in the economy, of course, because it's always been, it's the simple answer. It's the obvious answer. And so I say the same Rothschild funded system is what funded that. So, red team, blue team. It was how you built toward World War II, which would then give you the excuse to get back to Palestine because of this genocide that you were going to claim. At the same time, of course, it was all a hidden genocide of Christianity, right? You were going to get to talk about this false Holocaust, 6 million Jews. And, I always, it's such a sensitive issue that, I'm not a Holocaust denier. I deny, like all of history, that it isn't a bunch of lies. Did they kill lots and lots of people, including Jews? Of course they did. How many? God only knows. Does it matter? Of course not. It's these same people with the same agenda. So I don't designate whether they're a Christian or a Jew, and that's what makes it a genocide. That's what makes it bad. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the story we've been told about the Holocaust is one big fabrication. Hitler didn't gas all these Jews. That's all The same kind of lie that nuclear fallout is, the same kind of lie that going to the moon is, the same kind of lie that our education system, electing our president, our spreading democracy around the world, all these lies, lies, lies. So the hidden agenda that was really going on that you can see in history was they were annihilating Christianity in that world. Because after World War II, in part of the whole peace process of that, treaties was giving Stalin Eastern Europe, places like Hungary and Poland, where they went in and just, started genocidally destroying the Christian and Jewish people that had been there, that were the local inhabitants, really, and changing it to this red team, creating the red team parody for the geopolitical scheme. And then, of course, out of World War II also came the United Nations, which, if you go back and listen to the broadcasts that were being done in the 40s at the time, you can hear that they are already identifying it as the world government. The world government. They were already calling it world government. They were pointing out that this is what they were trying to do with the League of Nations from decades earlier, was set up a world government, and now they've finally done it. So the fact that they, use all that deception, New World Order. I mean, the New World Order that they talk about is the one that follows the Great War of Pike's, it's Pike's ultimate fallout of the world being ready to accept Lucifer in the open because they're so disillusioned and beaten down that they don't know where to turn. So that's the New World Order. It's under Lucifer out of the temple in Jerusalem after Zionism gets used to suck the world into the Third World War. So that's all done on the red team, blue team paradigm. Zionism these days being the spokesperson for the blue team, like the USA, whereas on the other side you get, Russia, Iran being the big opponents of the blue team. And then with them naturally come China now, Turkey, all being driven at the right time now. See, as we get ready to divide right down a red team, blue team paradigm, all the places that have been kept, out of our vision. Turkey, NATO member. We've been sending lots of weapons to Turkey over the years because, they're our friend. They're secular. They're democracy. Great NATO democracy. How quickly that's changed, huh? And how quickly we can suddenly say, oh my gosh, look, Turkey is going with Russia and they're in possession of all these weapons. And doesn't that just fall right into the lap of an unfortunate reactionary third world war, which is what they're going to make it look like. So I say that, we can know if our scripture is right and if this channel is right. You'll see that more and more the focus, that they'll keep talking more and more about war, and they may have more false flags and there'll be more troop movements, and we see lots of stock footage. I don't doubt we don't mind killing people. It's what they love it. Bloodlust, boys. Certainly part of the Luciferian doctrine, if that's all true. And so, but it's all going to lead to peace being this great solution they make. Palestine that averts war. And aren't we all so lucky? Isn't this wonderful? And then we can start to look at the next leg of this, where the two witnesses, probably Shia Muslims, will denounce this peace, denounce this temple that they're going to want to rebuild, this announcement that there's a 7-year deal to rebuild the temple. And there's going to be a movement against that. And so that'll be the next big step in this march toward World War III. But for now, I say we still have to watch for this saber rattling to finally get to the crescendo where, Donald Trump, the great deal maker, and Russia, and it's where, just like the Bay of Pigs, look how they did it in the Cold War, right to the precipice. and then pull us back. So I say that's what's coming next. And out of that, or in the midst of all this, you have this ISIS defeat. And what do we do about the Sunni region? So the real watch for me at this point in the march toward World War III is, are we going to see ISIS finished before the peace and the rise of some sort of moderate, this talk of who we going to get behind? Well, we got to get behind the Hashemite king who's going to help us, vet the right people to make sure that all our aid goes in the right direction. And it's out of his help with that, he's been talking about the Palestinian issue being central to solving all the problems in the Middle East. That's been his mantra for years now. So, watch how that all comes to play. So, my inclination is fall of ISIS, rise in prominence of this Hashemite king who can help us with the restabilization of the Sunni world, the moderation and the revealing of Islam's, true reconciliatory side with the world. It's not on a constant jihad. And out of that can come, his insistence that we need to solve this Palestinian issue, and that deal can be made. So that's what I'm watching for now. But it's all in this red team, blue team paradigm in which they've set that up for a long time, because the only other explanation is untenable, that this is all happening organically. It's all reactionary for the last 100 years. Oops, Prussia's doing this. Oops, Ottoman Empire's doing that. Oops, the Bolshevik Revolution. Oops, the Kingdom of Saud, we have radical Islam. Oops, we've got the Federal Reserve System in America. Now what do we do? Oops, we got World War I. Now what do we do? Right? Oops, the Russians are now communist atheists. Nobody talks about where'd all the Christians go. Now what do we do? So, all this reactionary history is impossible. Again, considering that since the 40s, if you're going to take it on their surface narrative, these NATO alliances had the hegemony for 70 years. They set up the UN. They went back and just carved out Palestine and said, yeah, we're going to put the Jews back in here. I mean, they did do anything they want. They changed leaderships in Egypt, in Iran, right? They changed leaderships all throughout South America and Central America. So, they already had all the control in the world. They certainly could have stood in the way of anybody that was, Russia suddenly threatening the world. Why wasn't that nipped in the bud in the 40s and 50s when our good friend Russia was given the Eastern Europe and was slaughtering all the Christians, and no one was talking about it because we were busy talking about, the poor Holocaust of the Jews, and we got to give them back Palestine, and now the Arabs are attacking the Jews, and right? Well, all that's going on. Meanwhile, the Christians are being slaughtered by Russia, and apparently Russia's building an arsenal great enough to threaten the world with nuclear annihilation. All right? So all this reactionary politics and geopolitics, in as I've said before, in which case you have the same think tanks and strategists like Kissinger in charge now for 40 years, and yet the policies we keep getting told are always incompetent by the previous administration, so that every 4 to 8 years, policies have to be changed, and the policies of 8 years ago are blamed as incompetent, yet they always keep coming from Kissinger and Brzezinski and the think tanks, the Rand Corporation, Chatham House, and all these different, those haven't changed. Right? So anyway, you get my drift. Red team, blue team, don't fall for it. Watch for the peace, and you'll know that I'm right, and or at least you'll know that the prophecies are right, and we can watch together for the next phase of it. Talk to you soon.